Amidst the mountains of the Iberian Peninsula and the rivers that flow through marshlands that span thousands of miles and miles lie two of the biggest powerhouses of Europe, France and Spain. Over the centuries, the two countries have influenced the entire world. The founders of Europe built a society out of the ruins of the Roman Empire, with a vision to live under one rule and faith. Out of this vision emerged the monarchy, powerful rulers who controlled land, nobles, and riches. They were influential figures who controlled everything in their realm. Soon, they were seen as God's representatives on earth and wielded tyrannical power over their subjects. This has changed over the years, with the modern monarch having no political power. But during the Middle Ages, kings and queens were able to acquire this position of power through conquests, elections, or inheritance. Ever since then, Europe has produced some of the most formidable rulers this world has ever seen. Some were brave warriors, and some were lovers of art and culture. All of them were patriots. They brought with them dynasties that ruled for centuries and brought stability to their kingdoms. But the fight to maintain their rule also led to scandals and destruction. To extend the boundaries of their dominion and spread their religious faith, they senselessly persecuted thousands and conquered numerous nations. This is the tale of two of the most glorious dynasties of the world, France and Spain. Our story begins in the early Middle Ages. Europe was an ever-changing landscape then, filled with gruesome wars, natural disasters, and even the bubonic plague. Religion was at the heart of most, if not all, of the issues in the continent. What we call France now was at that time filled with many small kingdoms with different rulers. Invasions and conquests were common, and the power of a king was quite fluctuant, which is why Charlemagne, or Charles the Great, came to be of such importance in Europe, with his intense military prowess and sharp intellect.
He's a fascinating figure because he is, I guess you could say, at the apex of an international European history, in that he's both claimed as the founder of the French kingdom and the German Empire.
While he wasn't the first king of the Franks, he was behind the unification of Western and Central Europe. His vision to bring Europe together came to be shared by many leaders later, including Napoleon Bonaparte and Adolf Hitler. Charlemagne was born to Pepin the Short and Bertrada of Laon on possibly the 2nd of April, 742 AD. Pepin had deposed the last Merovingian king, Childeric III, and had himself crowned king of the Franks. With this started the Carolingian dynasty that continued the unification their predecessors had started in Western Europe. At that time, Franks were a Germanic tribe of modern-day Belgium, France, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and Germany. After Pepin died in 768, his kingship was passed down to his sons, Charlemagne and Carloman, with divine assent. While both were given the rank of a king, they ruled separate parts of the Frankish kingdom equally. Charlemagne ruled over the outer parts of the kingdom, near the sea, Neustria, western Aquitaine, and the northern parts of Austrasia, and Carloman ruled the inner parts, southern Austrasia, Septimania, eastern Aquitaine, Burgundy, Provence, and Swabia. There was much rivalry between the two brothers, as both believed they were legitimate kings of the Franks. Charlemagne because he was the firstborn, Carloman because his brother was born out of wedlock. The year of his birth has been the topic of much debate, but it is impossible to calculate with certainty as there are different accounts of the same. To ensure his ascension to the throne over his brother, Charlemagne signed a treaty with the Duke of Bavaria and married a Lombard princess, the daughter of King Desiderius. This would ensure support for him when the time came to depose his brother. But the need for drastic measures was soon futile, as Carloman died on the 5th of December 771, due to natural causes. Less than a year later, Charlemagne broke the treaty with Bavaria and repudiated his wife, opting to marry a 13-year-old Swabian named Hildegard. When Charlemagne came to power, he set his eyes on uniting all these nations under one rule. He conquered the Lombards, the Avars, and Bavaria, among others. In 771, he was declared King of the Franks, and in 800, he was made Holy Roman Emperor by Pope Leo III. Charlemagne went on to have 18 children with 7 of his 10 known wives. While he enjoyed much success and recognition, he was almost always caught up in conflict and bloodshed. It took Charlemagne 30 years to successfully conquer Saxonia, where he forcibly converted Germanic pagans to Christianity and instituted a code of law and appointed counts. Those who refused to convert were killed, which led to renewed conflict. All in all, Charlemagne killed about 4,500 Saxons. In 813, he appointed his only surviving legitimate son, Louis the Pious, King of Aquitaine, co-emperor. Charlemagne died the same year after falling ill with pleurisy. He introduced what is now known as the Carolingian Renaissance, an era defined by the vast majority of literature, art, and architecture discussed among the people. His descendants comprise several royal dynasties, including the Habsburg and Capetian dynasties. In fact, most of the European noble families can trace some of their background back to Charlemagne, and because his kingdom came to be so vast, many often regard him as the father of Europe.
We sometimes talk about Europe as being a continent or a family of nations, and you could say that because some of these monarchies are literally families, it in some ways holds the continent together.
The Carolingian house ruled Franks for over 200 years, but the kingdom of the Franks became too large and communication between the regions became difficult. In 987, the Capetian house came to power after Hugh Capet was crowned King of the Franks.
And in 987, he simply took the throne himself, deposed the last Carolingian, and founded a new dynasty. And it's from him, Hugh, first king of this new dynasty, the Capetians, that we get all of the kings of France for the next 1,000 years. So it's really one of the most successful dynasties in Europe, and still has people sitting on the thrones in Spain and Luxembourg.
The Capetians were a powerful family that had controlled many kingdoms in the region before their bloodline controlled the monarchy. But as king, he had very little power, barely extending beyond Paris and Orléans. Franks were in disarray, and the crown was eventually passed down to Philip II in 1180. He was the first to be known as King of France instead of King of Franks, signifying the beginning of a new era for the region. Philip's reign ensured France remained a major European power with unchallenged authority. He ruled for 42 years and increased the size of France nearly sixfold, conquering Artois, Normandy, Touraine, Maine, Anjou, Poitou, Saintonge, and Auvergne. Philip was also responsible for expanding the city walls of Paris and paving the city street. He also built the first fortress of the Louvre and founded the University of Paris. his grandson Louis IX continued his policies and became known for his kindness, moral integrity, and sense of justice. Under his rule, France reached an economic and political peak, with Paris being the artistic capital of Europe. The city was adorned with elegant architecture and workshops of manuscripts, ivory, embroidery, and jewellery. It soon became one of Europe's largest cities, with an estimated population of 200,000 or more. In 1322, Charles IV was crowned king at a time when tensions between France and England were rising. His ascension to the throne did not quell fears, and soon Charles came toe-to-toe with King Edward II of England, when he unsuccessfully tried to be elected Holy Roman Emperor. No one could decide who should take over the crown when he died. Charles did not have any children, nor did he name an heir.
The Salic Law was something that the French lawyers and royal supporters pulled out from ancient history to try to support the succession of the Capetian dynasty from one branch to another and to block female succession.
While most of the French court believed it should be his patrilineal cousin, Philip, Charles's sister thought it should be her son, Edward III of England. Edward's ascension to the throne would mean giving control of France to England, which was unacceptable to the French. But England strongly supported the proposal, which ultimately led to what is known as the 100 Years' War. Amidst the chaos, Philip ascended the throne and continued fighting the war with England. By the time his son came to power, Europe was in shambles. The bubonic plague was sweeping through Europe, with a mortality rate of about 30 to 75%, and killing about 25 to 30 million people from 1347 to 1352. By the end of the pandemic, about 60% of the Iberian Peninsula had been killed. Filled with an extraordinary landscape of looming woods and rocky mountains, the population of Iberia was now down to about 2.5 million people. And in the region, a powerful country was finally coming together to form a sense of nationality. Spain, a diverse country comprised of many different areas at the time, the kingdoms of Aragon, Castile, Navarre, and the Emirate of Granada.
Of all the different European monarchies, the Spanish monarchy is one of the oldest, although as a unified monarchy, it's actually one of the more recent in that it, even in as late as the early 18th century, it was still composed of several different kingdoms. So while they had one shared monarch, the King of Aragon, the King of Castile were notionally two different people.
Until the 15th century, the region had seen religious persecution and conflict, changed only by the union of two of the most prominent houses in Spain. The Nasrid dynasty had dominated the Kingdom of Granada for 800 years, establishing Muslim control of the region. All this changed when Isabella I of Castile and Ferdinand II of Aragon married in secret in 1469.
And religion is at the core of everything the Spanish monarchy does. So Ferdinand is the King of Aragon, and Isabella is the Queen of Castile, and the two kingdoms have been fighting each other for centuries, but finally, through their union, are able to bring together the two things.
Their marriage was one of the most impressive acts of political theatre in history. It was about politics, and it was about ruling, but it wasn't about love. At first, Isabella I was born in 1451. As a young princess, she had to fight for every shred of power and influence, as her father saw her merely as a way of expanding Castilian territory. Ferdinand II, born in 1452, had also seen much conflict and revolts in Aragon, and wished to bring about a sense of unity in the region, so Spain could become a powerful kingdom. When the two of them decided to marry, it was against the wishes of both their guardians. Isabella escaped the court, and Ferdinand travelled through Castile, disguised as a servant. The two met for the first time a few days before their union, and in a small ceremony, they were married. A treaty was signed as part of the marriage, making Castile formally superior to Aragon. This meant Isabella would rule over both Castile and Aragon, with Ferdinand as her consort. This was a highly choreographed political union, but with it, Isabella and Ferdinand achieved their vision and changed the landscape and history of Spain forever. They soon conquered Granada, and in 1492 ended Muslim rule in the south and founded modern Spain as a united state. They also annexed the Spanish portion of Navarre to the Castilian crown in 1515. The French part of Navarre remained a separate kingdom until 1589. The nations were not legally united into a single country until the early 1700s, but it was around this time that the region began to be referred to as Spain. Isabella and Ferdinand's rule set the foundation for Spain to become the most powerful country in the 16th century, and the first true global power, conquering many countries and far-off lands. Their impact is still visible, as the Spanish language continues to be spoken by more people than English. Spain went on to have one of the most powerful colonial empires in world history, spanning nearly 5 centuries. The dynasty of Isabella and Ferdinand is called the House of Trastamara, ruling Spain until 1555.
So Ferdinand and Isabella had many children, but only one of them, Juana, or the eldest, the second oldest daughter, Juana, ultimately inherits both thrones. She marries a Habsburg from Austria, who is also the Duke of Burgundy, which brings the Netherlands to the Spanish Empire. He dies, she dies, and they leave one child called Charles. So Charles the First is then elected Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, so he's better known usually as Charles V. So for the first time, you've got one ruler who combines the Spanish monarchy, the Dutch states, the Holy Roman Empire, Naples, South America, Mexico. So you could say he's considered the first global ruler. And sometimes people say that the sun never sets on the British Empire, but really that could have been said earlier about Charles.
The House of Habsburg took over ruling Spain in 1556 and ruled over the Kingdom of Naples and Sicily, the Duchy of Milan, and also strongly influenced Genoa, Mantua, and Tuscany. The members of the Habsburg family often married each other to keep their wealth within the house. They were obsessed with keeping their blood blue, but it wreaked havoc on their genetics. Many were troubled with mental illness, disabilities, and vulnerability to disease. The inbreeding resulted in a king who ended the Habsburg line with him.
Towards the end of the 17th century, the Habsburgs had been interbreeding with each other so much that they had produced another Charles, Charles II, or Carlos II, who is seen as very pious, very good at being a Habsburg in terms of his religiosity, but not really very good at ruling.
King Charles II of Spain came to power in 1665 at the age of 4. He had an accentuated Habsburg jaw, a prominent facial feature of the Spanish and Austrian Habsburgs. Charles is described by many as short, senile and balding before the age of 35. He survived measles, chickenpox, rubella and smallpox as a child. His bout with rickets rendered him incapable of walking, and he ultimately did not produce any heirs. His death led to a power struggle between Charles of Austria and Philip of Anjou for the throne.
He had a lot of mental incapacities and physical deformities, and it became very clear by the 1690s that he was not going to produce an heir, which causes a crisis throughout Europe because Spain is the world's superpower. And so there were a lot of decisions. Should we keep the empire together and pass it on to one other dynasty, or should we split it up? And a number of treaties were negotiated in the 1690s to divide the Spanish monarchy. The British kept getting involved, despite not really having an actual say in it, and came up with several treaties of how to divide the Spanish monarchy. But in the end, Carlos II had sort of the last laugh, and he wanted to keep the Spanish monarchy together, all in one piece. So he willed the entire thing to Louis XIV's grandson, Philip, the Duke of Anjou.
Ultimately, Charles of Austria renounced his claims, and Philip ascended the throne. While Spain was still a major European power at this time, its power had dwindled. King Philip V was the first member of the House of Bourbon to rule as King of Spain. This was an essential factor in what took place in Europe after. France had seen substantial change when Philip ascended the Spanish throne in 1700. Market towns had increased rapidly, and the rural population had moved from the countryside to cities, fueling a rise in urbanization. Paris continued to be a place for artists, academics, urban buildings, and Gothic cathedrals. The House of Valois ruled France until 1589. They had produced 13 kings of France and led the country through countless wars. The house reigned during the culmination of decades of tension between Protestants and Catholics. The religious conflicts seemed endless until a marriage between the Catholic daughter of King Charles IX and the Protestant Henry of Navarre was arranged. Henry was eventually called to take up the role of King of France, but this was unacceptable to the French nobility because of his faith. Ultimately, he converted to Catholicism, was crowned King Henry IV, and founded the House of Bourbon in France in 1589. With his accession, the Kingdom of Navarre was incorporated into France. His ascension meant the House of Bourbon controlled both France and Spain. This meant that two of the most considerable global powers were in the hands of the same dynasty, thus threatening the European balance of power.
This caused outrage all across the rest of Europe. The House of Austria felt like they had been snubbed and that their birthright was stolen from them, and the British were very, very displeased with the idea that France and Spain would have the same dynasty. So the House of Bourbon ruling in both France and Spain really, really frightened people about the balance of power in Europe.
Many countries opposed this move, and ultimately the War of the Spanish Succession broke out, with Austria, France, the Dutch Republic, Savoy, and Great Britain taking sides. The war lasted for 13 years until the Treaty of Utrecht was signed, which forbade any possibility of unifying France and Spain under one crown. Philip also had to give up any claim to the French throne. The House of Bourbon kept a firm hold on its position as head of the monarchy in France and believed in the absolutist power of a king. This soon unravelled in the 18th century, leading to the French Revolution and even more wars. In 1643, King Louis XIV ascended the throne. He remains the longest reigning monarch in history. reigning as the King of France for 72 years and 110 days. His reign was turbulent as he continued the absolutist policy and worked on creating a centralized state government from the capital. Louis XIV lived a lavish lifestyle and strived for magnificence in everything he did. His obsession led to the construction of the Palace of Versailles, where he resided most of his reign. The palace became a symbol of luxury worldwide, which impressed the nobility and angered the public.
In part, this is to take the government out of Paris and bring it to a smaller town about 14 miles away, where the French monarchy can completely dominate every aspect of government. And Versailles has thousands of rooms, so the government lives there, all the high aristocracy lives there, visiting diplomats live there. So it becomes this sort of, you could say, summer camp for monarchy.
The parties of Versailles have been described as having fireworks, rides along the canal, fashionable masked balls, and so much more. The palace had more than 700 rooms and a hall of 357 Venetian mirrors and elaborate gardens. Soon it became the de facto capital of France. The glory of the palace would quickly end, however, as his grandson, Louis XVI, became the last king of France before the French Revolution.
One of the interesting contradictions about Louis XIV is that although he's seen as really the most powerful French monarch of the period, and indeed he was, the army of France under Louis XIV was the most powerful army that Europe had seen in quite some time. France succeeds Spain as Europe's superpower in the late 17th century under Louis XIV. So from this point of view, this is all very successful, and Louis XIV has achieved the Bourbon goal of becoming the most powerful monarchy in Europe. The flip side of that, however, is that this all costs a lot of money. And France had a lot of money. It's one of the richest countries in Europe, but war after war after war is extremely costly. Building the largest palace in Europe is extremely costly. And so by the end of Louis XIV's reign, the French people were really feeling pressed. Taxation was high, poverty was very, very high, and a series of natural disasters even made the situation worse.
Louis XVI inherited a country fighting multiple wars over the last few decades. That, combined with the glamorous life his predecessors had led, had created mounting debt. When he first came to the throne, he attempted to reform the government by abolishing serfdom and removing the land and labour tax. Louis also aimed to increase tolerance towards non-Catholics. While France was in a financial crisis, Queen Marie Antoinette continued living a luxurious lifestyle in Versailles. The French nobility did not welcome Louis XVI's reforms, and when Louis's councillors advised deregulating the grain market, it led to an increase in bread prices. This led to food scarcity and prompted the masses to revolt. Soon the abolition of the monarchy was intensely discussed by the public. Louis XVI was aware of this possibility and was scarred by the execution of King Charles I of England in 1649, who was his direct ancestor. Tensions continued rising, and the French Revolution began in 1789 with the storming of the Bastille fortress. In August, King Louis was arrested. A month later, the monarchy was abolished and the First French Republic was proclaimed. Louis XVI was then tried and found guilty of high treason and executed by guillotine on the 21st of January 1793. Marie Antoinette was also beheaded a few months later, effectively leading to an end of the monarchy. Following his death, The period in France is known as the Long 19th Century. The politics in the region were tumultuous, and the government underwent significant changes.
The king is executed in January of 1793, but still that's not the end of the story. There is more French monarchy to come.
France was declared an empire, and First Consort Napoleon Bonaparte was proclaimed emperor on 18th of May 1804. Napoleon remains a highly celebrated and controversial leader to this day. His presence changed not only the landscape of France, but Spain as well. The revolution influenced the masses even outside of France, and soon, in 1808, Spain's Aranjuez also saw a revolt which led to King Charles IV abdicating the throne. But to regain it, he asked Napoleon and his army of 100,000 soldiers for help. Emperor Napoleon instead installed his brother Joseph Bonaparte as King Joseph I of Spain, ending the reign of the House of Bourbon in the Iberian country. Napoleon was a powerful military ruler who completely changed France's governance system. He centralized power with a tightly structured bureaucracy. He also founded the Bank of France, leading to a revival of the economy. His foreign policy was essentially designed to isolate Great Britain and dominate Europe. In 1806, he decreed the Continental System, which prohibited all trade with Britain. In 1810, Russia opted out of the system, and Napoleon invaded Russia in retaliation. This would soon backfire on him, because Russia had expected an attack and had devised a strategy to overwhelm him. Instead of engaging his army directly, Russia adopted a tactic of retreating whenever Napoleon's forces attempted to attack. This led to Napoleon and his army trekking deeper into Russian territory. In the Battle of Borodino, his army suffered heavy losses, and when they went on marching to Moscow, they found that the entire population of the city had been evacuated. Russian troops then set fires across the city to deprive Napoleon's army of food and supplies. Soon, Napoleon faced the harsh Russian winter, and to save his exhausted army, he led them out of the country. Of the 600,000 soldiers who went into Russia, only 100,000 made it out. He returned to France, still engaged in the Peninsular War, suffering heavy losses. In 1813, Napoleon was defeated by a coalition of Austria, Prussia, Russia, Sweden, United Kingdom, Portugal, and Spain, in what came to be known as the Battle of Nations, or the War of the Sixth Coalition. In 1814, he was forced to abdicate the throne, and in 1815 he returned to France with a group of about 1,000 supporters, upon which the new King Louis XVIII fled, and Napoleon was crowned emperor again. But many parts of Europe still saw him as a threat. Napoleon decided to strike preemptively, but he lost the Battle of Waterloo near Brussels. He abdicated again, and the House of Bourbon was restored. His defeat spelt misfortune for his brother in Spain too. King Joseph had not won the people's hearts, as the public did not accept his French roots as legitimate. In 1813, he abdicated the throne and retreated to France. Just like in France, Spain restored the House of Bourbon as head of the monarchy. But soon the Spanish Revolution happened, but only after Spain saw its only queen regnant in history. Queen Isabella II came to the throne when she was just 2 years old, after her father's death in 1833. Spain became a constitutional monarchy in 1834, and Isabella's mother reigned in her name until she came of age. However, Isabella was not provided with an education suited for a future queen, and she has been described by historians as being ignorant and outspoken. She was also not popular among the masses, as many believed her uncle was the true heir to the Spanish throne. While Isabella's reign was marked by her religious fanaticism and authoritarian rule, she gained some popularity later. In 1848, she forgave a debt of more than 100 million reales owed her by the state, announcing, "The future doesn't matter to me." She also often donated diamonds to the poor. But Spain was struggling with corruption within the government, policy failures, and religious unrest, and there were many conspiracies to overthrow her. This eventually snowballed into the Glorious Revolution of 1868. The revolution was a major uprising led by liberals and republicans, who saw Queen Isabella as the cause of Spain's issues.
19th century Spain is plagued by a lot of pulling between the right and the left, and Isabella II is caught kind of in the middle and having to always legitimize her rule against her uncle and the Carlists, who wanted a different kind of monarchy. For a while she supported the moderates. Eventually that wasn't enough. They wanted a real rule of law. They wanted the Constitution to be upheld and not coup after coup supported by the army.
But they lacked proper direction about how to lead the country. After the First Spanish Republic collapsed, her son, Alfonso XII, was crowned King of Spain in 1875. Isabella lived the rest of her life in Paris and died in June 1901. The unrest and chaos in Spain were also present in France, which saw two more revolutions before the Third Republic was proclaimed in 1870. France would see even more changes in the next few decades with the World Wars and the Vichy government. The Fifth Republic was established on the 4th of October 1958 by Charles de Gaulle, present in France now. The road to peace was even rockier for Spain, with dictator Francisco Franco ruling Spain through forced labor, concentration camps, and executions.
I think it was meant to be a temporary measure to settle down a civil war or prevent a civil war. It doesn't. A civil war rages in Spain for quite some time. But in the long run, some people would argue that Franco's regime stabilizes Spain, keeps it out of World War II, and allows it to recover some of its equilibrium that had been so dismissed and so disruptive in the earlier parts of the 20th century. I don't think anybody really predicted that Franco would continue to run the country for quite as long as he did.
The House of Bourbon was eventually made head of the country again, and it remains in power today.
So the royal family, I think, in Spain still has a similar role to play that it has for the last 200 years, in that it represents the fact that all of Spain's parts are brought together in one crown. And the Spanish coat of arms does still have Castile and Aragon and Granada and Navarre, which I think is important. You could also say that the role of the Spanish monarchy today is in symbolizing Spain's history on the global stage. So quite a lot of Spain's influence still remains in Latin America in particular. And a number of people in Mexico or Argentina or Chile, they still look to the Spanish monarchy in sort of the way that people from the United States look to the British monarchy, as a symbol of the international presence of Spain and Spanish language and Spanish culture, but not necessarily their king.
Spain is now a parliamentary monarchy, where the monarch is the head of state and the prime minister is the head of the government. France, on the other hand, did away with monarchy entirely and now follows a semi-presidential republic, where the president is directly elected as the head of state. It took France 81 years after the First Revolution for the monarchy to completely disappear from the French political landscape. The royal houses still exist today, with many members holding a claim to the French throne.
The trouble is that there are three different potential people who could fill a throne. There are still some people who really remember the glory days of the Napoleonic Empire, and they still would support a candidacy of the current Bonaparte prince. There's also a group of people that are called the Orleanists, and they tend to be the ones who are most connected to the monarchy today.
These pretenders have support from French royalists who believe only a king can unify the nation. But most of them live discreet lives and don't glorify their royal origin.
They keep a low profile, they run charities, they run orders of knighthood and chivalry and donate to Catholic causes, things like that.
In Spain, the royal family is still flourishing, with the support of millions of Spaniards. Unfortunately, not all of them have remained popular, with former King Juan Carlos abdicating the throne in favour of his son after allegations of improper ties to business deals in Saudi Arabia. He now lives in Dubai, while his son Felipe VI reigns as King of Spain. While his role is mainly apolitical, King Felipe continues to represent Spain in international matters and can ratify government-approved treaties. The development of the modern monarchy emerged as a way to stay relevant through the many changes that have taken place in the world over the last centuries. The royals are now the emblem of state authority as they inspire the public through moments of crisis, but with no say in actual governance. Many countries now have constitutional monarchies where the power of the king or queen has been transferred to different societal groups. Their history now serves as a glimpse into how civilization has evolved and shaped the world as we know it now. France and Spain remain global powers with tremendous economic power, having had one of the most enduring empires ever.